Hi there, I'm David Busch, and this is Busch History. This is topic 18.2. 18.1, the previous presentation, was all about World War I. There was a PowerPoint, there was an introduction, there was a big look at the United States in World War I. Topic 18.2 is going to be a more focused look at a specific assignment on World War I with a specific vocabulary. So let me cue that up and let's take a quick look. This is a homework assignment that I have used many times over the years, and it really brings together what's happening in World War I in order. Let's take a look. It says World War I people in terms exercise describe the significance of each of the terms below. I use chapter 22 and Farragher's out of many as a reference for this. You can use any textbook you like because World War I is World War I, and any competent American history textbook will cover this. You will, however, need to use other sources. So I have 7 terms: Central Powers, Allies, Franz Ferdinand, Trench Warfare, Stalemate, Neutrality, U-boats. And then I have a question. So you should be able to answer or describe these terms. Central Powers, the bad guys. Allies, the good guys. Franz Ferdinand, the Archduke of Austria-Hungary that was assassinated. Trench warfare, the style of fighting in World War I. Stalemate, because of trench warfare, there weren't really a lot of battles. The battles that there were horrific. Certainly, the casualties were very high, but for the most part, people hung out in these trenches, fearing the charge. Neutrality, the United States tried to stay neutral. We were neutral at the beginning of World War I because of our immigrant population having emotional ties to both sides. And U-boats. U-boats were the weapon of choice on the Atlantic Ocean for the Germans, and they were very effective. So the question, what events led to the beginning of World War I, and what were the exact war years? Well, you put all of these together, and they lead us into World War I. The war years are 1914 to 1918, although the United States is 1917 and 1918. Now take a look. Question 1 kind of continues. Freedom of the seas. Woodrow Wilson believed in freedom of the seas, and he didn't think any other nation had a right to interfere with it. The Lusitania, the sinking of the Lusitania in 1915, appeared to violate freedom of the seas. And then, of course, the Germans issued the Sussex Pledge, said we're not going to do it anymore, and did it again anyway. He kept us out of war was Wilson's slogan for re-election in 1916, and he did effectively keep us out of war. The Zimmerman Note. Well, that was a straw that broke the camel's back. That was the intercepted communique, supposedly, because we're not sure if it was real or not, that said that Mexico should form an alliance with Germany, and if they did, and they were successful, they would get back the entire southwest part of the United States. April 16th, 1917, that's when we actually declared war on the Central Powers. General John J. Pershing was the general in charge of the American Expeditionary Force. And the Selective Service Act of 1917 was the draft to increase our Army. 10 million people registered, 2.5 million people were called up. Our Army increased from 200,000 to 2.5 million very quickly, and you couldn't buy your way out of it. So what events led to U.S. involvement, and when did the U.S. declare war? Right there, 8 through 14. The American Expeditionary Force. That was the term for the American soldiers. When General Pershing went over to Europe to lead the American Expeditionary Force, President Wilson gave General Pershing one standing order. Yes, there were other communications, but one standing order. He told Pershing, maintain a separate American army. He did not want our soldiers combined with the other armies of Europe. He wanted American command over American soldiers. And Pershing did that. We did keep a separate American army. Doughboys, that was the term for American soldiers. Many reasons why they're called doughboys. The helmet looked like a pie plate, maybe. They wore a belt like Bakers wore, maybe. Their buttons looked like Bakers, they look like pie pans, maybe. Pick your answer. It was an all-black infantry group And there's a lot of evidence that General Pershing was racist, and he didn't believe that blacks should be fighting in World War I. So what happened was the 369 got so many tough assignments, they got a lot of suicide missions, they often led charges, and what happened was, because of all this, they became the most decorated group in the American Army during World War I. Pretty cool. Eddie Rickenbacker. Eddie Rickenbacker was the American flying ace. Eddie Rickenbacker was Snoopy. Snoopy and the Red Baron. He fought Baron von Richthofen, who was the German flying ace. And they fought in these biplanes, 2 wings, and they fought over the skies of Germany and France. And it became legendary. So Eddie Rickenbacker was the first American flying ace. The War Industries Board regulated production in the United States of all resources necessary for war, and it was headed by Bernard Baruch. So we have what events led to our involvement, and we now have our involvement during the war, and the Fuel Administration is going to regulate production and distribution of fuel. We're going to have not enough fuel available at home so we can have an abundance to fight the war. So what efforts were made to mobilize for war and manage a wartime economy? Well, all of these things. Okay, now we have the Food Administration, Liberty Bonds, Liberty Measles, Liberty Sandwich, the Espionage and Sedition Acts, the 14 points, and self-determination. Well, the Food Administration was headed by Herbert Hoover, and it oversaw the production of food in the United States and encouraged people to grow victory gardens. Gardens where they grew their own fruit and vegetables as opposed to buying stuff from the large manufacturers and the large-scale farmers. Liberty Bonds were sold by Boy Scouts, and they were bonds to help fight the war. You'd buy a bond, the United States government would pay you when the war is over, a very traditional way of raising money to fight wars in the United States. We weren't taxed to fight them so much as we were raising money through bonds. Liberty Measles, German measles. Can't have anything German in the United States, so they're Liberty Measles. Liberty Sandwich, a hamburger. Because a hamburger was invented in Hamburg, Germany. You can't have that. The Espionage and Sedition Acts, passed in 1917, were to curb anti-American war sentiments. If you participate in anti-war activities, you're committing a crime against the United States. The two big ones here were Eugene V. Debs and Schenck. Schenck versus the United States. Schenck was distributing leaflets against the war, and Debs was speaking out against the war. The 14 points, Wilson's ideas for keeping peace after World War I was over. The interesting thing about that is he didn't get a lot of those. He did get his League of Nations, but we don't join the League of Nations. I'll do that in a second. And self-determination. Self-determination was nations would decide for themselves. There'd be no taking of colonies. There'd be no artificial borders constructed by the victors. That didn't happen either. So describe the effect of war on African Americans and women. Not connected to these specifically, but in both cases increased opportunities because they were taking the places of white men who had been working in the factories who were now fighting in the war. So now we have the League of Nations, the Treaty of Versailles, the National War Labor Board, Women in Industry Service, American Protective League, the American Civil Liberties Union, and the Great Migration. The League of Nations, that was what Wilson wanted more than anything else. It's the forerunner of the United Nations. And it would be an international organization for nations to participate in settling their differences, their political differences, or their economic differences without going to war. We don't join the League of Nations. We don't join the League of Nations because we don't sign the Treaty of Versailles. We don't join the League of Nations, and Germany is not allowed to join the League of Nations. So the country that's blamed for the war can't join. And we, the victors, the country that brings victory, can't join either. And we don't sign the Treaty of Versailles because when Wilson comes back with the treaty to present to the Senate, a couple of things go on. First of all, Wilson is not well when he comes back. He had been working tirelessly to get this treaty passed in Europe, And he finally gets them to buy some of his 14 points, specifically the League of Nations. Comes back to the United States, and he wants to present this treaty in the Senate. He did not take a single Democrat with him. This is bad politics all the way around. He did not take a single Democrat with him to Europe. So he comes back, and the ranking senator is a guy by the name of Henry Cabot Lodge. That's just a cool name. But anyway, Henry Cabot Lodge is the ranking Republican, and he wants to bring this treaty before the Senate. So as the story goes, Wilson's bringing the treaty to the Senate because the Senate ratifies treaties. And Henry Cabot Lodge meets him at the door and says, "Mr. President, I'd like to carry the treaty in to present it." And according to folktale and history, Wilson says, "Not on your life, Senator." So he snubs Henry Cabot Lodge. And now we have a battle royale. We have a battle royale between the Republicans and Democrats in the United States Senate over the ratification of this treaty. The Republicans do not want us involved in any international organization because they saw what happened with the alliance system in Europe. Wilson believes that we need to be involved in this international organization if the peace is going to hold. Wilson goes on this barnstorming tour around the United States trying to drum up support among the population for this Treaty of Versailles. Well, in the middle of this barnstorming tour, Wilson is taken ill. He has a stroke. He has a debilitating stroke, and he's pretty much done as being an active president of the United States. And his wife, Edith, becomes his caretaker and the principal speaker for her husband because he's unable to speak well anymore at all. He was really severely impaired by this stroke. And many people believe if Wilson had not had a stroke, that the Treaty of Versailles stood a reasonable chance of being ratified. But without it, without Wilson being able to get out there and campaign for this stroke, without Wilson being out there be able to campaign for this treaty, it goes down in flames in the Senate. It's very unfortunate. Now the other things, National War Labor Board, once again, heavy-handed government during the war. It's regulating labor during the war. The Women in Industry Service, we talked about that. It's going to regulate women's wages and women in factories during the war. The American Protective League is going to be a pro-American league that is going to trump up propaganda for people who support the war, and is going to try and vilify people who are against the war. The American Civil Liberties Union is going to come up as a new organization against the American Protective League. The American Civil Liberties Union is just what it sounds like. It's going to be an organization that exists to protect our civil liberties. It's going to come up as an organization to protect the First Amendment, still very popular today, and the Great Migration. The Great Migration occurs during World War I and after World War I. It's a huge movement of African Americans from the southern part of the United States to the northeastern part of the United States where the jobs are. It's called the Great Migration. When did the war end, and how did the outcome affect the United States both domestically and internationally? The war ended 11/11/11, November 11th at 11 a.m. 1918. And it was a negotiated armistice. The armistice stops the fighting, and the Treaty of Versailles would then be negotiated when the war was over. And how did it affect us both domestically and internationally? It showed the world who the strongest nation in the world was, for sure. It also made us a lot of money with our industries during the war, and it made us reticent. It made us shy about participating in world affairs, because we're going to not ratify the Treaty of Versailles. We're going to stick our heads in the sand and think that if we don't get involved in the League of Nations, that it's going to keep us safe. Remember, it was called the Great War. It was called the War to End All Wars. You know when it was called World War I? Think about that for a second. During World War II. So it wasn't the war to end all wars. The Treaty of Versailles was a failure. All it did was punish the Germans and put the United States in a splendid little area of peace and euphoria, thinking that we could stay out of world affairs. We know that's not going to work. We know that we're going to go through the 1920s. The Germans are not going to be able to pay their reparations to the rest of Europe. That's going to cause problems in Europe between the Germans and the Europeans. It's going to allow Adolf Hitler to rise to power. We're going to hit the Depression. The Depression is going to cause a huge drop in employment in the United States. And if anything causes unemployment to drop, it's a war. And we're going to end up in World War II, a mere 20 years after the Treaty of Versailles. So anyway, that's it for now from Bush history. Always, always be skeptical. Always be skeptical when you're looking at facts in American history. Because who writes the history? The winners write the history. The losers have a hell of a story to tell sometimes too. Anyway, this is topic 18.2. As with topic 18.1, as soon as I'm done putting all this together, it'll be available on the Bush History website, www.bushhistory.net. And for now, I'm David Busch. Have a great day. Take care.